Hello everyone, welcome to Life Hype's Kinesiologist Corner. I'm Andrew, I'm a kinesiologist. I call myself that because I'm pretty sure that's the only thing I can legally call myself. Today's video is the start of a series of videos where I'm going to cover the sport of boxing, and particularly recovery and overtraining syndrome. I don't mean to insinuate that boxing is inherently doomed for overtraining or overreaching, but I have some friends that talk to me about it and ask me some questions, so that's pretty much what I'm just going to cover. So I've recently taken up boxing just for fun and sport because it's a good exercise and a lot of good cardio. And the people I've been training with started asking me some questions. They know my history as a kinesiologist or going through, grad school for exercise science. So they asked me some questions about potential recovery or the potential for overtraining. And obviously I didn't feel comfortable giving immediate answers because while I've learned about overtraining and overreaching in some other sport venues, I don't know a ton about boxing. So I wanted to dive into some research, and that's why instead of just answering them in terms of here's a dumb answer that I'm pulling out of my butt, I am making a video about it. My first step in researching what boxing is or how it would relate to overtraining is to determine what type of exercise boxing is. So my initial thought is that boxing is a HIIT sport or a high intensity interval training based sport. You're in the ring for about 3 minutes to 5 minutes, and you have lots of short bursts of energy, and you take long rest in between things. But there's also an endurance element. Specifically in relation to the people asking me are both training boxing for themselves, but also training other people, which means they're just doing general activity all day, which is a pretty big toll on your endurance. There's a bunch of different ways to exercise the body, and every different way is going to impact your body differently. Based on how it impacts your body, the recovery time or recovery method is going to be different. So for that, what type of exercise is boxing? Depending on who you ask, you should get a very nuanced answer or the standard professional response of, it depends. Anyone that doesn't give you a it depends answer is probably just pulling something out of their ass. So in determining what type of exercise boxing is, let's look at a few key elements of what you're doing during boxing. I have a list, so don't shun me for looking down at my computer. We have bodyweight shoulder movements, obviously a lot of them, which is the punch. Short, quick squats. When you're dodging and weaving, you're doing a lot of short, quick squats. Sidestepping, lunging. There's also a lot of psychological aspects to the sport of boxing. You have to anticipate hits, you have to predict movements, you have to strategize how you're going to do things, and that also takes a physical toll on your body. The other key elements of boxing that kind of relate more to what type of sport it is the short bursts of intense activity and multiple rounds with minimal rest in between. Obviously, there's way more to boxing than just that short list, but I just started it, and as much research as I've done, I'm still not an expert. So this leads back to my first analysis of boxing in calling it a HIIT sport, a high intensity interval training sport, because mainly of the short rounds and short bursts of energy followed by small rest intervals. That interval obviously is the key word here. Additionally, a lot of the movements in boxing are anaerobic, but with the constrained time of the round, they have to keep themselves in a heightened state, which kind of moves them into a more aerobic activity, thus the interval part. Now I have a quick interjecting point. Boxing as a sport is not the sole crux of my research question. This came about because I was consulted about general fatigue from a boxer who not only trains for themselves, but also trains clients in boxing. And general personal training or group training, anything where you're doing a large amount of physical activity or physical activity consultation would probably be considered a moderate to vigorous physical activity, or MVPA, which is, over a long period of time, very tiring. The MVPA in this situation would fall more in line with endurance exercise. So combined with the high intensity interval training coming from just boxing, you get a lot of workout all day, which leads to possible overreaching or overtraining, which will be the focus from here on out. I'm splitting these into a few videos because there's a lot of topics I want to cover, and I feel like each of them deserves its own video and has a bulk of research that can cover so much time. There's a few larger topics that I'm looking to do research on and gain a better understanding of. First, what is overtraining? Second, how can you see overtraining in HIIT or cardiovascular endurance exercise? Third, what are other physiological decrements that come with HIIT or endurance exercise? Fourth, non-injury based physiological issues incurred from boxing and boxing training. Fifth, general recovery from overtraining syndrome. And lastly, boxing specific recovery. In this first video, I'll be attempting to cover overtraining, define it, and all the terms there within. I'll only be doing a few of the topics at a time because fortunately there is a lot of information and research to cover all of these topics. In the sense that I've been using it, overtraining is the overarching term to describe the field of research that covers underperformance or severe decrements to an athlete's performance. There's some past terminology that covers the same symptoms as overtraining, and there is also some current theses that determine overtraining as a continuum. Courtesy of the European College of Sports Science, here are some quick definitions to know. First off, we have functional overreaching, sometimes referred to as short-term overreaching. It is the increased training leading to a temporary performance decrement and with improved performance after rest. This is seen as a positive training method. It's generally what you would call also overload training, where you work harder and you get sore or you get weak the next day, but after appropriate amount of rest, you are stronger than you were before. The second term is non-functional overreaching or long-term overreaching. Is defined as intense training leading to a longer performance decrement, but with full recovery after rest, accompanied by increased psychologic and/or neuroendocrinologic symptoms. This means that your mental game or your motivation may suffer during your extended period of rest and recovery. Additionally, the hormones associated with performance, both mental and physical, will have increased activity to overcompensate for the intense exercise. The overall outcome for non-functional overtraining is negative due to the loss of time and the negative symptoms. The last term is overtraining, and it's similar to non-functional overreaching. The only distinguishing factor is the amount of time needed to recover. In non-functional overreaching, you need anywhere up to about 21 days to recover. Anything after that could be defined as overtraining. There's no singular consensus on what would be defined as overtraining because it's a very broad term and generally diagnosed case by case. Before continuing, there are some distinctions that should be made. In the pursuit of greater performance or achievement of athletic goals, overload training, intense exercises are needed to improve yourself. To get better, you do have to make a workout harder and work harder yourself than you did before. This, of course, can lead to symptoms that are in line with overreaching, but are far less severe and with appropriate recovery lead to an overall benefit. It's very difficult to distinguish between non-functional overreaching and overtraining syndrome because the difference really is only a longer recovery period. Non-functional overreaching is much less rare than overtraining. It is unfortunately common, but thankfully can be recovered from. True overtraining syndrome is rare, extreme, and could possibly lead to the end of a career for an athlete. The purpose of further delineating overtraining syndrome from non-functional overreaching and the reasoning behind giving it the syndrome half is to hone in on the fact that overtraining is not simply a product of intense exercise. It is a multifactorial problem, and two of the big ones are physiological and psychological stress. A quick side note, we often muddle the definitions of stress and anxiety. My use of stress here is the physical and psychological stressors that are factors of overtraining symptoms, which of course can include anxiety. So what does overtraining look like? I'll get into more specific symptoms for different types of exercise and sports in coming videos. But as mentioned before, the symptoms are similar but at varying levels of intensity, from functional overreaching all the way up to overtraining. So I'll kind of go through a gradient of how the symptoms are presented, all the way from the basic overload training, which is a good thing, all the way up to overtraining, which is the not good thing. Starting off, we have overload training. Overload training is a standard element of many exercise training strategies, and the symptoms, if you want to call them that, are well known and very easy to spot by researchers, coaches, and athletes themselves. Breaking it down to its simplest form, if you go and lift some heavy weights and you really hit those peak numbers, the next day you will not be able to hit those peak numbers, most likely, and you'll be very sore. But with appropriate rest, when you come back, you will be lifting heavier than you were before. And that's the general idea of functional overreaching or overload training. Non-functional overreaching is similar to functional overreaching or overload training, but those symptoms are intensified to include some more hormonal changes and other physiological stress changes. And then finally, in overtraining, as we know it, overtraining is not necessarily defined by the intensity of the symptoms, but more the recovery from those symptoms. Physiological decrements to performance are a single element of overreaching or overtraining syndrome, but are also probably the easiest to detail. Included would be physical weakness, persistent soreness, and just a general reduction of fitness ability or cardiovascular endurance. This is not to say that all of the potential symptoms are stemming directly from intensified exercise. The human body is a cohesive unit. Everything works in tandem. Any change to one system will impact another system. Other than tangible physical underperformance, changes in mood or motivation or changes stemming from biochemical sources that are persisting as long as the physical decrements could be a sign of extreme overreaching or overtraining. So now that we're plenty afraid of overreaching and overtraining, how do we avoid getting to that point? Well, prevention is the best antidote to underperformance, and recovery is the best cure. Obviously, there's some nuance to this. Unique people are going to have unique requirements for maintenance and recovery. The most common method of prevention is information monitoring and tracking. Getting into some tangential points here, I wholeheartedly stand behind personal monitoring of information. This would be your weight, your height, food logs, anything of that nature that you can track. Luckily, when I was in school, I had access to a lot of fun scientific devices like a bod pod or a met cart, so I could always keep good track of all of my biological, biochemical information. Anything that you could have access to or want to have access to, I would definitely recommend it. Back on the point, training logs, food logs, sleep logs, these are all fantastic tools to monitor your health during your training. There's two types of information that can be gathered from all these logs. You have qualitative and quantitative, or subjective and objective information. To put these in context of a training log, quantitative information would be all of the numbers or specific information. So you have your sets, your reps, your weights, your duration of exercise, heart rate, weight, things of that nature. While it is a little tedious, it is pretty easy to keep track of this. And when combined with your nutrition and your sleep information, it gives you a very well-rounded image of your training. The other side of this coin is qualitative information, or your subjective opinion or feelings of your training. It seems easy enough, but it's actually pretty challenging to do effectively. It helps to be detailed. So let's say, for example, you're doing squats and you write down your sets, reps, and weights. and it looks generally lower than it did before. So the qualitative information, you would think back on how you felt during that exercise. Maybe you have a sore calf, or you're hungry, or you didn't get enough sleep. All of that information will be very important, because then in the future that would lead to changes that you could make in your training or your other health habits. So that about covers everything I wanted to talk about today, which is overtraining and overreaching, and point it a little bit in the direction of boxing, where this whole series is kind of going to point at, which is boxing and recovery. Thank you everyone for watching this Life Hype Kinesiology video with me. If you want to learn some more interesting exercise science topics, you can go to our website, lifehype.org, or you can follow us on Facebook. We're always posting our things there. If you want to come learn things in person, we're in Coeur d'Alene, North Idaho, working out at 360 Fitness. And if you want some more personalized training plans, we have some options available on our Patreon page. Other than that, I will see you in the next video.